We've been told, I think, different times. We know that there are some requirements about how quickly projects have to be completed under the Building America Bonds program. Do we know what that amount of time is, and do these projected projects fall within that time frame? I mean, I've heard 2 years, I've heard 3 years, I've heard 2 or 3 years, and we've got projects, at least as they're laid out here, being projected to be done before fiscal years. As it's laid out now, are all these going to qualify for the America Bonds? I think if after the voters have made that decision, we obviously don't know what that decision is going to be, but being able to take advantage of these Build America bonds is important if we are going to do this.
I talked to Craig about that and asked him about the schedule. The schedule was really just to balance our expenditures, not knowing that we maybe have an influx of money to do them more quickly. We would like to do them more quickly, so all the things on that schedule would be escalated and the calendar would be compressed. We have 3 years to issue those bonds. Craig, Mike, do you remember Elizabeth saying that we had 5 years to spend the money? Was that?
It was 3 years. Once the bonds are issued, you have 3 years to complete the project.
3 years, so once the bonds. But we would amend the schedule of the things you have listed there, but we would do them much more quickly because we have the bonds.
So then the decision to be made then at that point, not at this point, because we don't even know if this is going to be a possibility, is that to ensure that the projects that are identified being necessary can in fact be managed and completed properly in that time. Correct. So I mean, obviously that'll be a special point. I'm sure there'll be some different opinions on that. Just as I do agree, I supported previously and continue to support that there shouldn't be any refinancing of any existing debt, and that none of the proceeds from any potential issue in the future should be used for working capital.
Just point of clarification. And I know that's a big if, but if we issue bonds in December, we would have the summers of 2011, 2012, 2013, which is what the schedule calls for. So it would be within the 3 years. It would be basically 2 years. Other comments?
Well, I support Mark completely. I think that to take advantage of Build America, to use it only for capital improvements is the way to go. And I think it's also true when you're dealing with multiple buildings and many projects, you have a better chance of completion versus taking all that money and trying to do one project at one building. It would take you a much greater period of time. So it's certainly within our ability to get these things done in time.
Again, I'm going to just address some of the issues that you have brought up because board members can't advocate for or get a position, on a referendum. So what you had brought up on some of the things with the capital improvements projects, historically we've been 20 to 30% under what the projections have been, and that's held true for as long as I've been on this board. We had a bond issue, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. Same thing, the projects were lost by 20 to 30% typically, and what are projected here, so you take those numbers down. Again, that's a historical, and I would assume that's going to continue. The other big issue I have, just from a legal standpoint, Build America bonds have basically the same stipulations that tax-free munis would. And you alluded to the 3-year window for doing projects. The other thing that's part of this, or maybe part of this, again, I'm not an expert on Build America, but I'm more so on tax-free, is that the useful life of this cannot, the bonds can't exceed the life of the equipment. And here you have assets that are 7 to 9 years that you're going to take out a 20-year note on in your proposal and your recommendation. And obviously that's problematic. If they were tax-free, you'd actually have to rebate that back to the government. They would give you an audit and you'd be fined and have to pay that money back out of your operating expenses. So, from just the business standpoint, it's very problematic is that you have items on here like univents where we were told a few meetings ago that they're about 8 to 9 years is their lifespan. And it'd be kind of like buying a car and then taking a 20-year note on it and still paying it for when you have your third car with the third payment. So it just is a bad business. Lighting fixtures would be very similar to that. There's items on here, like I said, that are problematic with the useful life. The other issue that that we would use the money that we get from them from the surplus on the tips before they expire to be used for capital. And that's in the millions of dollars projected going forward for the life of those tips. And that's not included in here. So you know, the number isn't really that number. We never really, I think you need to find what the true number is before making that recommendation. So that's just my concern, is that you're not including, you know, a large number of items that are germane to that recommendation. And it was the same issues we had brought up originally with the board. The other is, this is your recommendation. As I recall, the previous superintendent didn't recommend doing what the board did. I mean, the board is going to have the authority to issue these. And I appreciate you saying that the window is open for 3 years. The other item is that the existing bonds can be restructured, and that can also be done again at a later time. So, you know, I just want to make sure that you're presenting, you know, more of the information.
Like Tim, I'm also somewhat uncomfortable with this whole discussion, because this isn't actually before the board to decide anything at this point. It's before the public, and the public has their say. I'm uncomfortable that we're actually really even talking about it. But, since we're talking about it, I think that when the time comes, if we are given a chance to make a decision about doing this enormous list of projects, I think that we need to be very carefully reconsidering at that time which ones we're going to do, because I don't believe, and I've said this before, that accelerating a lot of these projects into the 3-year window is sound planning. I think doing 11 roofs in 3 years is not sound planning, because at some time in the future, we're going to have to do 11 roofs again, all at the same time. And I think it would be more prudent to schedule some of these things out. And, you know, I think we just need to not take the idea that, hey, we've got the money, we've got it now, let's spend it now. If we get the opportunity, if the public decides that they want to approve this, then I think we still have the onus on us to be very prudent with that money at that time. And I would hope that maybe you would come back with a different recommendation after further